The garden center knows something you don't, and they're counting on keeping it that way. Every bag of synthetic fertilizer, every bottle of liquid feed, every overpriced soil amendment on that shelf, it exists because someone forgot what their grandfather knew, or never got the chance to learn. There was a time when families fed themselves through droughts, through dust storms, through years when buying anything extra was simply not an option. They didn't have garden centers. They had knowledge. Hard-won, passed down, dirt under the fingernails knowledge, and it worked. 6 of those tricks are still out there, waiting. They cost almost nothing, they use no chemicals, and the food they grow is better than anything you'll pull off a store shelf. These methods survived the Depression, they'll survive your backyard, but the clock is ticking on this knowledge. Every generation that doesn't pass it down is a generation that lines someone else's pockets instead. The secret ingredient in the bucket. Here's the first trick, and it might be the simplest thing in this entire list. Old-timers called it garden gravy. They made it every spring and again in midsummer. It cost them nothing, and it did something that no commercial fertilizer on the market today can fully replicate. Take a handful of finished compost, dark, crumbly, earthy smelling, the kind that looks like it came from the forest floor. Drop it into a 5-gallon bucket of water. Not tap water if you can help it, because the chlorine in municipal water suppresses microbial life. Rainwater is better, pond water is better still. Let it soak for 24 to 48 hours. Stir it once or twice if you think of it. Then strain out the solids through a piece of old burlap or a worn-out cotton t-shirt. What you're left with is a rich, dark brown liquid absolutely teeming with microbial life. Billions of living organisms per teaspoon. It smells faintly of earth and rain and something alive. That smell is not a side effect. That smell is the point. Pour it directly onto the soil around your plant roots. Watch the liquid darken the soil as it sinks in, spreading outward from the stem in a slow, even ring. Or dilute it slightly and spray it on the leaves as a foliar feed, coating the undersides where the stomata open and close like tiny mouths. Either way, something remarkable happens within hours. The microbes in that liquid go to work immediately, breaking down organic matter in the surrounding soil and making nutrients available to plant roots in a form they can actually absorb. Commercial fertilizers dump nutrients directly into the root zone in a chemical form that bypasses the soil ecosystem entirely. That's it. That's the whole transaction. Compost tea feeds the soil ecosystem first, and the plants benefit as a cascading result. That's a fundamentally different approach, and a far more sustainable one. The cost is zero. If you're already composting, you have everything you need. The only equipment is a bucket, water, and something to strain with. Your grandfather didn't need a label to tell him it worked. He could see it in the color of his leaves within a week, in the thickness of his stems by midsummer, and in the size of his harvest come fall. Now you know exactly why. But compost tea is just the beginning. The next trick involves burying something most people would throw away, and it quietly feeds your garden for the next decade. The buried secret. Somewhere right now, a homesteader is digging a trench in their backyard. The neighbors think it's strange. The logs going into the ground look like waste, like a mistake, like someone who doesn't know what they're doing. But that homesteader knows something the neighbors don't, something old, something almost forgotten. And in 5 years, that patch of ground will outproduce every raised bed on the block, with almost no watering, no fertilizer, and no explanation owed to anyone. This is Hügelkultur, and it changes everything. The word is German. It means hill culture. But the practice is ancient, used across Central Europe for centuries by farmers who couldn't afford to waste anything. Not a rotting log, not a pile of branches, not a handful of kitchen scraps. They buried it all, and then they grew food on top of it. Here's how it works. You dig a trench, 1 to 2 feet deep, as long as you need it. Into that trench, you layer logs first. The bigger the better. Oak, maple, fruit wood, almost anything that isn't black walnut or treated lumber. On top of the logs, you add smaller branches, then straw, then kitchen scraps, then a layer of compost if you have it, then you cover the whole thing with the soil you dug out. The bed will mound up. That's intentional. That's the hill. Now here's what happens underground, and this is where it gets extraordinary. Wood is a sponge. A single cubic foot of rotting hardwood can hold several gallons of water. As those buried logs begin to decompose, slowly, over years, they absorb rainfall and irrigation like a reservoir buried directly beneath your root zone. During a dry week, that moisture wicks upward through capillary action. Your plants draw on it. The soil above stays workable and damp long after an unmodified bed has cracked and dried out into something that looks like the surface of the moon. Meanwhile, the decomposition process generates heat. Gentle, consistent, biological heat that radiates upward through the mound. That extends your growing season at both ends. Earlier springs, later falls. Seedlings that would stall in a cold April bed push forward in a Hügelkultur mound because the ground beneath them is quietly, steadily warm. And as the wood breaks down, it releases a slow, steady stream of nutrients. not a chemical spike that burns roots and leaches away in the next rain. A long, measured release that mirrors the way forests actually feed themselves. We're talking 5 to 10 years of slow nutrition from a single buried log, a decade of reduced watering, a decade without reaching for a bag of moisture retention crystals or a bottle of slow-release fertilizer. The garden center sells you those products every season. Hugelkultur makes them irrelevant. The first year, the bed is good. The second year, it's better. By year 3, the microbial activity in that buried wood has transformed the surrounding soil into something dark and rich and alive in a way that bagged potting mix simply cannot replicate. Worms move in by the thousands. You can hear them if you press your ear to the soil on a quiet morning. A faint living movement beneath the surface, like the sound of something breathing slowly underground. Fungal networks spread through the decomposing wood and connect to plant roots directly, sharing nutrients across the entire bed in a communication system that predates agriculture by hundreds of millions of years. This is not a trend. This is not a social media gardening hack. This is a centuries-old system that European peasant farmers used to feed their families when failure meant starvation. It works because it works with the way the natural world actually functions, not against it. The setup takes one afternoon. The payoff lasts longer than most garden projects you'll ever attempt. But what nobody sees coming, what even experienced gardeners miss, is what happens when you combine hugelkultur with the next trick on this list. Because buried wood is powerful on its own. But add what comes next, and you've built something that functions less like a garden bed and more like a self-sustaining ecosystem. The Reckoning. It is a Tuesday morning in rural Appalachia, sometime around 1987. A retired coal miner named Earl Dutton is standing in his backyard watching a steel drum burn. He is not doing anything dramatic. He is not making a statement. He is doing what his father did and what his father's father did before that. He is making biochar, and what he is sitting on, without knowing the science, without reading a single journal article, is one of the most powerful soil amendments ever documented by modern agriculture. Biochar is not charcoal. That distinction matters. Most people hear burn wood and think ash. Ash is the enemy here. Ash is what you get when you let the fire finish its job. Biochar is what you get when you interrupt it. When you kill the fire before the wood fully combusts. What you are left with is a carbon matrix, a skeletal structure of pure black carbon riddled with microscopic pores, channels, and chambers. Under a microscope, a single gram of biochar contains surface area equivalent to a tennis court. Let that number sit with you for a moment. 1 gram, a tennis court. Here is how Earl does it and how you should do it. You load a steel drum or dig a shallow pit with dry wood scraps, branches, or any untreated lumber offcuts. You light it, you let it burn hot until the wood has turned black and is glowing but not yet crumbling to white ash. That window is narrow, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 40, depending on the wood and the weather and how dry the timber is. You watch it carefully. You do not walk away. When the wood looks like something between a coal and a cinder, black, solid, not yet powdering at the edges, you extinguish it. You drench it with water. You smother it with a metal lid. You stop the burn dead in its tracks. What you pull out of that drum is biochar. And what you do next is what separates the people who get results from the people who get nothing. Raw biochar does not work. That is the mistake. That is the part nobody tells you when they hand you a bag of premium activated charcoal at the garden center for $32. Raw biochar is biologically inert. It is an empty structure, a vacant apartment building with no tenants. You put it straight in the ground and it actually pulls nitrogen out of your soil for the first season while it tries to fill those empty pores on its own. You have made things worse. You have paid for the privilege of making things worse. Earl does not do that. Earl charges his biochar first. He takes a 5-gallon bucket, fills it halfway with finished compost tea, the same brew described 2 tricks ago on this list, and submerges the biochar in it. He weighs it down with a brick. He lets it soak for 48 hours. The porous structure drinks in the microbial life, the dissolved nutrients, the biological complexity of that tea. Every chamber fills, every channel colonizes. What goes into the ground now is not an empty structure, it is a preloaded ecosystem. 1 billion microbes with a permanent address. Some old-timers skip the compost tea and use something far simpler, something free. They soak their biochar in diluted urine. 1 part urine, 10 parts water, 48-hour soak. The nitrogen loads directly into the char matrix. It sounds crude. It works spectacularly. The science backs it completely. Urine is sterile, high in urea, and practically free. Every person on this planet produces approximately 500 liters of it per year. Most of it goes into municipal water treatment systems at enormous public expense. Earl puts his in the garden. Earl's tomatoes are not struggling. Once you apply charged biochar to your beds, mixed into the top 6 inches at roughly 10 to 15% by volume, something long-term begins. This is where the story gets almost difficult to believe. Biochar does not break down, it does not decompose, it does not leach out, It is chemically stable for hundreds of years. Archaeological sites in the Amazon basin, the famous Terra Preta soils, contain biochar deposits that are still actively improving soil fertility after 2,000 years. 2,000 years. You make this amendment once, you apply it once, and you have fundamentally altered the soil structure of that bed for longer than any living person will be around to measure. What it does in the short term is just as significant. The pore structure improves water retention dramatically. Sandy soils that drain too fast suddenly hold moisture longer. Clay soils that compact and suffocate roots suddenly have aeration channels running through them like a network of tiny tunnels. The microbial habitat expands. Root systems colonize the char itself, finding anchorage and moisture reserves in dry periods. The plants above do not look like they are surviving. They look like they are thriving. They look like someone spent $40 a bag on premium potting mix and perlite and mycorrhizal inoculants. They look like that because that is, functionally, what has happened, for the cost of a pile of wood scraps and an afternoon of watching a fire. Earl Dutton does not know any of this terminology. He does not know what a microbial habitat is. He does not know what terra preta means. He knows that his grandfather called it black gold and told him to make it every fall without fail. He knows that the beds where he uses it produce differently than the beds where he does not. He knows what he can see, and what he can see is enough. But what nobody saw coming was what happened when a soil scientist from Ohio State University visited Earl's property in 1989 and took core samples from beds that had been receiving biochar for over 40 years. She arrived in field boots and a university jacket, carrying a set of stainless steel sampling tubes and a clipboard. She worked methodically down the row, pressing each tube into the soil with a steady downward lean, twisting it a quarter turn, pulling it free. The cores came out dark, almost black, dense with a texture that looked nothing like the pale, sandy subsoil visible in the unworked ground just beyond the fence line. She lined the tubes up on the tailgate of her truck and stood there looking at them for a long moment without speaking. Then she asked Earl how long he had been doing this. He told her his grandfather started it. She wrote that down. Then she looked at the drum still sitting near the fence, black with decades of use, and asked if she could photograph it. Earl shrugged and said it was just an old drum. She said it was evidence. The microbial diversity levels she later documented in her laboratory had previously only appeared in old-growth forest floor samples. She published the findings. The garden center did not carry them on its shelves. The fugitive. It starts simply. It always starts simply. A small trench, maybe 8 inches deep, dug between 2 rows of vegetables on a quiet Saturday morning in late spring. The gardener has kitchen scraps, vegetable peels, coffee grounds, crushed eggshells, the soft outer leaves of a cabbage that didn't make it to the table. She does not have a compost bin. She does not want one. She buries the scraps directly in the trench, covers them with the soil she dug out, firms it down with the back of the shovel, and walks away. What she has just done is older than recorded history, and it is about to make every bag of soil amendment she has ever purchased completely unnecessary. Trench composting is not a technique. It is a philosophy. The entire premise is a direct rejection of the modern composting industrial complex. The tumblers, the bins, the activators, the turning schedules, the carbon to nitrogen ratio calculators. All of that infrastructure exists to solve a problem that does not need solving. The problem of where to put organic matter. The answer is in the ground, under the plants, exactly where it needs to end up anyway. Here's what happens in that trench after the lid of soil goes on. The microbial population in the surrounding soil detects the presence of fresh organic material within hours. Bacteria mobilize first, arriving through the soil water like a tide moving toward shore. They begin breaking down the soft tissue of the scraps, releasing nitrogen and phosphorus into the immediate soil environment in forms that plant roots can intercept directly. Within days, fungal networks extend filaments toward the decomposing material, threading through the soil in white, hair-thin strands visible if you dig carefully and look closely. Within 2 weeks, if the soil is healthy, earthworms arrive. Not 1 or 2, dozens. They are not visiting. They are moving in. They are eating, casting, tunneling, aerating. They are doing, in a confined area directly adjacent to your plant roots, everything a $1,000 soil amendment program is designed to simulate. The plants notice immediately. Root systems have electrochemical sensitivity to nutrient gradients in soil. They do not wait for the decomposition to complete. They grow toward it. They extend root hairs into the zone of active decomposition and begin extracting available nutrients in real time while the breakdown is still happening around them. The plant and the decomposition process are running simultaneously, in parallel, feeding each other. The plant's root exudates, stimulate microbial activity. The microbial activity releases more nutrients. The nutrients drive more root growth. This is not a garden bed. This is a feedback loop. And once it starts, it does not stop on its own. The cost of this is the cost of a shovel and the effort of digging. That is the complete financial summary. No bags, no bins, no turning, no waiting 3 months for a pile to finish, no transporting finished compost from a pile in the corner of the yard to the bed where it is needed. The scraps go directly into the ground, directly where the plants are growing. The middle step, the pile, the bin, the tumbler, is simply removed from the equation entirely. The rotation strategy is what separates the people who understand this technique from the people who use it casually. You do not trench in the same location twice in a row. You move the trench. Season 1, you bury between the first and second row. Season 2, you bury between the second and third row. Season 3, the third and fourth. By year 4, you have fed every square foot of that bed from below, in rotation, without ever applying a single purchased amendment. The entire bed has been rebuilt from underneath, one trench at a time, by the organisms that were already living in your soil. You did not add anything from outside the system. You redirected what was already there. The people who sell you 40-pound bags of compost at the garden center do not want you to know this is possible. Not because it is a conspiracy, but because it is so straightforward, so low cost, and so effective that there is genuinely nothing to sell you. The knowledge itself is the product, and the knowledge has been free for 10,000 years. There is a woman in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, named Ruth Hoover. She is 81 years old. She has been trench composting the same quarter-acre kitchen garden since 1968. She has not purchased bagged compost since 1971. She has not purchased fertilizer since 1974. She has not purchased soil amendments of any kind in over 40 years. Her soil, according to a Penn State extension test taken in 2019, has organic matter content of 9.4%. The national average for agricultural topsoil is between 1 and 3%. Her soil does not look like garden soil. It looks like chocolate cake. It is dark, loose, and alive in a way that makes professional horticulturalists stop talking mid-sentence when they walk through her gate. One of them crouched down, picked up a handful, and held it to his nose the way a sommelier holds a glass of wine. He said it smelled like money. Ruth said it smelled like dinner. Ruth does not consider herself a particularly skilled gardener. She says she is lazy. She says she does not want to haul compost across the yard. She says burying scraps is easier than everything else she has ever tried. She is right on all 3 counts. But what she has built over 56 years of lazy, low-effort trench composting is a soil ecosystem of extraordinary complexity and productivity. Her yields per square foot consistently exceed what neighboring market gardens achieve with full commercial fertility programs. She grows more food with less effort on worse starting ground than people who spend hundreds of dollars a season on inputs. She does it with a shovel and kitchen scraps and the passage of time. The reckoning for the garden industry is this: the most effective soil building method available to home gardeners requires no product, no equipment, no expertise, and almost no labor. It requires only the understanding that organic matter belongs in the ground, not in a bin. But what nobody saw coming was the agricultural research published in 2021 showing that trench composted plots in a controlled study outperformed both surface composted and fertilized plots by 31% in total yield, not just in one season, but compounded across 5 consecutive growing seasons, with the performance gap widening every single year. The researchers noted that the fertility advantage appeared to be self-reinforcing. The better the soil got, the faster it improved. The system accelerated itself. They called it a feedback cascade. Ruth Hoover called it Tuesday. She was standing at her kitchen window when the extension agent called to tell her about the study results. He read her the numbers carefully, the way people do when they expect to impress someone. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said she was glad the researchers had figured it out. She said her mother had known it since the 1940s. She said she had to go because her beans needed picking. She hung up the phone, pulled on her garden boots, the same pair she had resoled twice since 2003, walked out the back door, and got back to work. The soil beneath her feet was dark and soft and warm with life. It had been that way for decades. It would be that way long after she was gone. That is the point. That has always been the point. They called it a weed. They were wrong about that too. Try this next. Your garden will thank you.